We know what happened. We know the horror of it, the monstrosity of it, the incomprehensible savagery. I'm Juliana Margulies. Yes, we know about anti-Semitism. And yes, we know about the Holocaust. And that knowledge teaches us about evil things, the malignancy of hate, the human potential for cruelty, our propensity to demonize the other, the unintended complicity of innocent bystanders. And it teaches us that what hate once did, hate could do again. Yes, we know, but he doesn't, nor does she, or him, or her, or him, or her, or them, or them, or them, or them, or them. We are witnessing a frightening increase in the number of people who know little or nothing of the Holocaust, who never heard of Auschwitz or Belzec, or Bergen-Belsen, or Buchenwald, or Dachau. And we all know what happens when we don't learn from history. We have the responsibility to keep the memories alive. But people are forgetting. It is not impossible that the 6 million Jews who were slaughtered will soon outnumber those who remember them. The sacred vow to never forget is being broken right before our eyes. And that is why the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, exists. It is the bastion of remembering, the only one of its kind in New York City. The museum touches the mind as well as the heart. It is where people honor those who perished, where people learn, where people cry, where people begin to understand. The Holocaust has lessons that need to be learned, not only the ones of hate, but hate's opposite. For as dark as the Holocaust was, or perhaps because of its darkness, it illuminates the human capacity for kindness and love, empathy and compassion, civility, heroism, and bravery. It teaches us about the ability to endure the unendurable and go on to thrive. If we don't learn from this singular, heinous atrocity, those lessons will be lost to our children. If we let the Holocaust fade from our memories, if it remains unknown to the young, then we will fail to recognize when such horrors begin to raise their ugly heads anew. The Museum of Jewish Heritage vows to make sure that never, ever happens.
My name is Rita Lerner, and I am the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. My mother, Henny Dermashkin Gurko, was a survivor of the Vilna Ghetto and Dachau. My father, Simon Gurko, survived in Siberia. I have been part of this commemoration for more than 30 years and have seen it grow to include the participation of the 3rd generation and now the 4th generation, and that is how it should be. Even though this year we are not able to gather in person, it is still our obligation to remember those that we lost. Like so many of you, I began attending this commemoration with parents and other family members. With each passing year, there are fewer and fewer familiar faces. We honor their memory and the memory of all survivors who have passed away, leaving us to carry on their great legacy. It is vital to know that the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, will always be at the forefront of this important observance. On behalf of the museum and its many partner organizations, we are grateful that you are joining us today online from your homes all over the globe. Together, we will honor our Kedoshim who perished in the Holocaust. Before our program begins, let me thank the staff of the Museum of Jewish Heritage for their efforts in putting together this virtual commemoration. Now, there is a message from our chairman, Bruce Ratner.
Thank you, Rita. I'm Bruce Ratner, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. As we gather virtually today, it is our great honor to have so many Holocaust survivors and their families joining us from their homes. There are 80,000 Holocaust survivors in the United States, about half of whom live in the New York City tri-state area. They serve as our collective conscience and our call to action, reminding us of both what is possible in the world's darkest hours and the resilience of the human spirit. Survivors have been at the core of the museum work since our founding. We have several survivors on our board of trustees, 37 survivors in our speakers bureau who speak to groups of school children every single week, and many more survivors in our broader museum community. They are our most important community members, and many of them are also among our most vulnerable during the coronavirus pandemic. To all the survivors with us today, we are honored by your presence. We are grateful for the ways you inspire and teach us, and we stand with you during this very challenging time. Today's program will feature remarks by a survivor and the granddaughter of a survivor, a candle lighting ceremony, messages from dignitaries, and several pieces of beautiful music and prayer. It is an occasion for both remembrance and an occasion for hope. It is now my pleasure to welcome Jack Klieger to deliver remarks on behalf of our museum. Jack.
Thank you, Rita and Bruce, for your remarks. Hello, everyone. I'm Jack Klieger, President and CEO of the museum. It's an honor to be with you virtually today for the 2020 Annual Gathering of Remembrance. We have gathered on a Sunday in April for more than 30 years, thousands strong, in the nation's largest Holocaust commemoration, to say with one voice that we will never forget. We honor the memory of those who perished at the hands of evil and pay tribute to those who survived and have made a better world for us all. But we have never gathered under circumstances quite like these. The coronavirus pandemic presents a serious challenge to our community, to New York City, and to the nation. In addition to its terrible toll on human life, the pandemic has sparked an increase in violent anti-Semitism, both online and in the streets, as well as an increase in discrimination against Asian Americans and other minority communities. This increase in hate makes coming together all the more important, even though we do so virtually rather than at Temple Emanu-El in New York City. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and joining us from your homes around the country. We owe special recognition and gratitude to the Holocaust survivors who are with us right now. Your resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship and your conviction to tell your stories to the next generation give us daily inspiration. I also want to welcome all the children, the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren of survivors who are with us today. By telling the stories of your survivor family members, you are carrying the torch of Holocaust memory, reminding us that never again must be an active commitment, not a passive utterance. We come together every year because we all feel a shared conviction that history requires us to remember the Holocaust, that we owe it to survivors and victims to tell the story of how they lived and of how they died, and to make meaning of their suffering so that we might build a more secure and tolerant world. It was that same conviction that inspired New Yorkers to come together 4 decades ago and lay out the vision for a living memorial that would become our museum. Time is running out, wrote co-founder George Klein in May 1981 in the report of Mayor Ed Koch's Task Force on the Holocaust. It is essential, he continued, that an inspirational and meaningful Holocaust memorial be created in New York City now, while the survivors who live here and are still alive can give firsthand testimony that must be passed down to future generations. When a people forgets its past, it loses the very essence of its personality and character. We must not allow this to happen. In 2020, as we look back 4 decades later, we can confidently say that we did not allow that to happen. We built the 3rd largest Holocaust museum in the world, which now welcomes over 200,000 visitors a year, including more than 60,000 school children. We have a groundbreaking Auschwitz exhibition on display, and we have a community of dedicated, resilient Holocaust survivors in our museum community who give their testimony every single week. But time is still running out. Our challenge now is finding ways to remember and teach that utilize new technologies and reach new generations. This year's virtual annual gathering of remembrance, while not our original plan, is exactly the type of initiative that will carry Holocaust memory into the future. So too are our virtual public programs and extensive virtual resources for learning and teaching. I would encourage all of you to visit the museum's website at www.mjhnyc.org and explore these resources for yourself. In this period of transition and renewal, each of us must also take on a degree of personal responsibility. Institutions matter, but individuals matter more. By making a personal commitment to remember this history and its lessons, you serve as ambassadors to your communities, ensuring that we fulfill our sacred obligation to the past and to the future. I'm grateful to Rita Lerner, to Ann Oster, and to the Board of Trustees of the Museum for their leadership, and to Josh Mack and Gia Pace and other museum staff for coordinating today's program, and to all the museum supporters and partners to make our work possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Joshua Davidson, the Senior Rabbi at Temple Emanu-El.
In the early 1800s, a butcher from the Ukrainian town of Teplik presented the beloved sage, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, with an exquisite gift, a chair. Anyone who beheld this chair knew that it was something special. And Rabbi Nachman cherished it. He would sit in this chair day and night. There he would teach Torah. There he would spin his wonderful tales of kings and princesses in far-off lands. There, from time to time, he would drift off to sleep. Once, he dreamt that the chair carried him up to the heavens, even as far as Jerusalem. When Reb Nachman died, his disciples placed his beloved chair beside the ark in their shul, and there it sat for generations until the Nazis came to power. At that time, the descendants of Reb Nachman's disciples knew that if they were to survive, they would have to flee, to scatter. But what to do with the chair? They couldn't leave it behind. It was too precious. They also knew that it was too large for any one of them to carry by himself. So what they decided to do was to cut the chair into pieces, and each of the descendants of Reb Nachman's disciples carried one piece. But before they separated, the descendants of the Rebbe's disciples made a commitment to one another. When the war ended, they would find each other again in Jerusalem and reassemble the chair. Now we know the tragedy that befell our people and how many perished. But somehow, as if by miracle, each of the descendants of Reb Nachman's disciples who carried a piece of that chair survived. And in the course of time, they found one another in Jerusalem, where indeed they put the pieces back together. And to this day, if you go to the Mea Sharim section of Jerusalem, to the shul of the Bratslava Hasidim, you will find Reb Nachman's chair, exactly where you would expect it to be, beside their ark. I share this story with you today, not to compare moments in history, but because we too have been forced to scatter, to be separate, each of us holding whatever piece of normalcy we can find in our lives as tightly as we can, wondering if we'll ever be able to put the pieces back together again. I'm Rabbi Joshua Davidson, the senior rabbi of Temple Emanu-El. Year after year, it is our privilege to host this annual gathering of remembrance. And I want us to believe that we will be able to put the pieces back together again, and we will be together again. Today, we mourn the 6 million of our people murdered by the Nazis. And as we do, we honor the courage of the survivors, their children and grandchildren, who have bravely carried the pieces, rebuilding them into a legacy that has become the foundation of our Jewish life and our Jewish future. May God bless each of them and each of us. Amen.
Unter die polnische Grüninke Bäumerlach spielen sich mehr nicht keine Moischalach, Schleumerlach. Spielen sich mehr nicht keine Sorelach, Lealach, nicht auf kein Gräserlach, nicht auf kein Schneealach. Silchen scheune mer nicht die Stimmalach, vorne die Kune de Simmelach, Mottalach, Schimmalach, mit die zerkrellte, zerdrappete Zoralach, vorne me beweisen, vorne der Riem und Geboralach. Streuer Nazien, die polnische Bäumerlach, teut seinen jiddische Heimen und Heimalach, teut seinen Gessalach, Chorebe die Heisalach, wo es verstecken sich Kinder wie Meiselach, jiddische Kinder mit große Augenlach, schwarze Asoi wie mit Heuschech verzeugene, Eigeler Fulle mit Pachat verworfene, unter dem Umblick dem Bräune getroffene. Unter die polnische Grüninke Bäumerlach spielen sich mehr nicht kein Moischalach, Schloi Malach, spielen sich mehr, nicht keine Sorge, Lealach, nicht auf kein Gräsalach, nicht auf kein
Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Berger, and I have been a board member of the Young Friends of the Museum of Jewish Heritage for the last 4.5 years. I am so thankful to the museum for this opportunity to speak to you today. I am also thankful, given everything that is going on in the world right now, that the museum is still holding this event to remember those who perished during the Holocaust and to honor the survivors who are still with us. It is crucial in times like these that we remain connected to each other and to our shared past. Knowing that both of my father's parents survived the Holocaust and went on to create new lives afterwards gives me hope that we will persevere as well. I've shared my grandparents' stories with school children, friends, and coworkers, but never with an audience this large. I volunteered for this opportunity because telling my grandparents' stories is something that I am meant to do, as I am the reason that my Zadie eventually started sharing his stories publicly. I don't remember specifically learning that my grandparents were survivors. It was just something that I knew. As a child, though, I surely didn't understand the gravity of what that meant. So, when my 8th grade English teacher said we would be studying the Holocaust, I volunteered my Zadie to come speak to our class. I was so eager to volunteer that it never occurred to me what I was asking of him, or that besides his testimonial interviews, he had never spoken publicly about his experiences before. But he decided to come. Maybe he just couldn't say no to his oldest granddaughter. I vividly remember my classmates sitting on the floor, surrounding him as he spoke, with tears flowing all around. He was so touched by the experience and by the thank you letters that he received afterwards that he committed much of his life after that to speaking in schools, in synagogues, JCCs, and so on. He credited me with opening up this powerful experience for him, and we had a special bond as a result. My Zadie's story is sadly quite similar to many you have probably heard or read before. He was in numerous work and concentration camps, including Auschwitz and Dachau. He participated in the Death March, and he was the sole survivor of his large family. Because he told the details of his story somewhat widely, and because my grandmother mostly refused to tell hers, I actually want to share her largely untold story with you today. My grandmother grew up in Paris, where she lived with her parents and her younger brother. In the first roundup of foreign-born Jewish men, her father was taken to Bon-La-Rolande internment camp. Initially, he could have visitors and even send gifts home to his children. Eventually, however, he was sent to Auschwitz, where he was killed. During this time, my great-grandmother became ill and was unable to take care of her children. So she sent my 13-year-old grandmother and her 6-year-old brother to a Jewish orphanage in Paris. One day, some soldiers came to the orphanage to take the children on a picnic. My grandmother made a split-second decision. She grabbed her brother and they hid. They were the only ones who did not go on this picnic. And the records that are available today show that those children were sent to Auschwitz and were likely mostly killed. This story always gets to me, for I really can't imagine doing something so smart, brave, and risky at the age of 13. It is really miraculous to me. Once the orphanage was empty, they snuck back to their apartment, and their mother eventually found someone to smuggle the children out of Paris to an aunt who was living in a rural village in Vichy, France. That is where they survived the war. My great-grandmother, however, was eventually sent to Auschwitz and killed. Luckily, when the war ended, my grandmother and my great-uncle still had the gifts that their father made for them in Beaune-la-Rolande. As a result, my parents have a wooden lamp that my great-grandfather made, which is believed to be modeled after a clock tower in Beaune-la-Rolande. The clock in the lamp is actually made from my great-grandfather's watch face. My great-uncle, who lives in Israel, has a tin Kiddush cup that his father made for him. And my aunt, who also lives in Israel, has the matching cup that he made for my grandmother. I became involved with the museum because of my grandparents' experiences. I wanted to help make sure that survivors' stories are never forgotten. I also wanted to connect with others with a common past and a shared commitment to preserving our Jewish history. Through the museum, I have formed lifelong friendships. And at my first Young Friends board meeting, I met my now husband, John, who was also attending his first board meeting. I believe that my grandparents led me there to find him. Just over 2 years ago, we honored them and their stories under the chuppah by using the Kiddush cup that my great-grandfather made for my grandmother while being held in Beaune-la-Rolande. John and I will forever carry on my grandparents' legacies, and we will pass them down to our children, the first of whom is scheduled to arrive this September.
My name is Fred Turner. I was born in Vienna in 1923, but grew up in Prague before the war. I had a younger brother, family around me, and members of the family, as any family has uncles, aunts, a clan around me. In 1939, Prague was occupied by the Nazis, and all the anti-Jewish laws went into effect. Loss of property, loss of jobs, loss of apartments, everything, anything of value was confiscated by the Nazis. I managed to get false papers and was working in the country on a farm, but that didn't last long. And in 1939, the war started, and before long, I had to return to Prague because somebody betrayed my papers, and in 1941 I was taken into my first concentration camp, Lipa, which was quote-unquote a good camp because nobody got killed there. I was there for nearly a year, a slave labor with young people, mostly a small camp, building roads, forestry work, very little food, but no killing took place there. In 1943, that camp was liquidated and we were shipped to Terezin or Theresienstadt. And most of you know about Terezin. I was in Terezin until 1944, when the entire Terezin was empty, or by and large, most people were shipped to Auschwitz. So was I, and arrived in Auschwitz, passed by Mengele, and was pulled out. At that time, I was 20 years old, that is physically fit, so was not sent into the gas. I'm the only one in the family that passed through camps and survived. My father went to Auschwitz and was killed there. My brother was killed in Treblinka, and so was most of the rest of the family. One of the things that we wear is a total awareness of what was going on around us. And the thing that I started to think about even then, early in the war, is what is going on around me? How come suddenly lies rewriting of history became the rule of the day? Now, what didn't change was our insides, my insides. I knew what was right and what was wrong, what was true and what was pretense or outright lies. It colored me, that idea went on to this day. That is, as things happening around me right now, and I'm talking at a time when the coronavirus is very much in the air. And questions of truth, telling the truth, being aware and having data, not opinions, rule me. There is within me a certain core of ideas. One of these is trying to analyze what goes on around me. And that held true then. Some of the camps were better than others. Theresienstadt comes to mind. At a time when the Nazis treated Jews with utter disregard for human beings, we said to each other, "Good morning, and how are you?" We called each other by our names, rather than using cuss words, as the Nazis were never talking to us as persons, but as objects to show their ideological contempt. We remained what we were. And I think that attitude carried me and carried the community all the way through the war. The answer to me was, how did we survive emotionally? We remained what we were. We were reasonable, yes, there were variations among us, of course, not everybody was a saint, far from it, but we were aware of not being like the Nazis, that is, interested in the workings of the mind, trying to analyze what was going on around us. I was very fortunate that my father had, as a young man already, taught me about sociology. So I looked at it like an observer. When something happened around me, I didn't take it personally. I said, here is a dictatorship at work. Yes, it was very, very difficult at times. And one of the things that I find difficult today is to recall details, physical details. I remember very, very much the emotional response that we had, and trying to deal with it. When people around us, around me, around us, were killed at random, I don't like to remember these things. I find it today still quite upsetting to remember details. I have nightmares. I have a difficult time thinking about all the people around me. They are very, very much in my mind. At every turn, in every camp, there were some wonderful, learned, cultured people, people who would have contributed to the world immeasurably. The community, Prague Jewish community, was a very, very creative community with many authors, composers, actors, playwrights. They all disappeared. But what did not disappear is their work to the extent that it survived.
Out of the Holocaust came the state of Israel. Out of enslavement in Egypt came freedom in the Ten Commandments. Yesterday is another metaphor like that in our history. The woman who was killed at the synagogue, her name was Lori Kay, was shot because she stood between the gunman, the evil gunman, and the rabbi. She gave her life, protecting his. May her memory be a blessing. Let Lori's heroism be an inspiring example for all of us as we struggle to confront the immense challenges facing us. All it takes is one courageous person standing up to stop hate from spreading as Lori did. Every single one of us in this room can be that courageous person, but only if we meet the moment with clarity and conviction. Today we remember how so many have tried to annihilate the Jewish people and our spirit. All have failed. Pharaoh is gone. Hitler is gone. But the Jewish people live on in Eretz Yisrael and America. Am Yisrael Chai.
2 weeks ago, we read in the Pesach Seder, בכל דור ודור חייב אדם לראות את עצמו כאילו הוא יצא ממצרים. In every generation, every person has to see himself or herself as he or she personally left Egypt. In the last generations, we also have to say, בכל דור ודור חייב אדם לראות את עצמו כאילו הוא שוחרר מאושוויץ. In every generation has a person to see himself or herself as if he or she were liberated from Auschwitz. What does it mean? It means several things. It means that we have to mourn, like our brethren that were liberated from Auschwitz mourned their relatives that didn't make it. It means that we have to teach, to make others remember, as those that were liberated from Auschwitz and other camps, they are in the future, the responsibility will be ours to tell the story that they went through. It means that we have to try to feel what they felt. That little child that was burned alive in the synagogue, we have to try to identify and feel what he felt. And finally, it means that we have to learn lessons from the Holocaust. My lesson, my personal lessons, and there are many lessons from the Holocaust, from the Shoah, is that only the existence of a strong, robust, secure Jewish state, the state of Israel, really guarantees that it will happen never again. יהי זכרם של אחינו ואחיותינו ברוך. May the memory of our brethren, sisters, and brothers that were exterminated by the Germans and their collaborators for blessing, inspiration, and learning.
silent, not for one more day. We'll speak out so future generations will be saved. We won't close our eyes and fear and hide. We'll let our beauty reign. Nothing stands between us and the world we dream to know. We were made to love no matter how much hate we face. We will fight for those who cannot fight and need our strength. Won't close our eyes in fear and hide. We'll let our beauty reign. Nothing stands between us and the world we dream to know. We'll break the silence, dreaming words of hope.
No guardaremos el silencio ni un día más. Levantaremos nuestras voces, nos escucharán. No guardaremos el silencio ni un día más. Levantaremos nuestras voces sin temor para abrir camino y elevar nuestra humanidad. Unidos lograremos que en el mundo haya paz.
Won't be silent, not for one more day. We'll speak out, so the future will be safe. Won't close our eyes and fear and hide. We're gonna let our beauty reign. We're gonna fight until there's change, until there's no more hate.
That moment when he wrote the melody, he was not a prisoner. He was in contact with heaven and with his cosmic reality.
We'll break the silence.
My name is Irvin Forley. I lived in Munkacs, Hungary. I'm a survivor, 92 years old, survivor of Auschwitz. My father, my brother, my grandparents, my cousins, my uncles, aunts, all were killed during the Holocaust. In their memory, I'm lighting this candle.
My name is Jerry Lindenstrauss, was born in Germany and spent the war in a ghetto in Shanghai. I'm lighting this candle with my community.
My name is Arthur Spielman. I come from Krakow. I was born in 1928, and I lived in Krakow till almost the end of 1943. I want to light the candle in the memory of my family who perished in the Holocaust. Approximately a couple of hundred people that mostly lived in Krakow. My family was the only survivors, my immediate family, my mother, father, my two sisters, myself, and one cousin that got saved with us together. I want to light this candle for all those who perished in the Holocaust.
My name is Erica Estes. This candle is for my parents, Paul and Irma Beitfreundlich, who were murdered in Auschwitz on July the 11th, 1942, as well as for my 5 beloved boy cousins and my uncle and aunts.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ruth Westheimer. I come originally from Germany, Frankfurt am Main. I was saved because I was at a Kindertransport that took me to Switzerland. The children's home became an orphanage, and I'm lighting a beautiful candle. Too bad you can't see it. It's from Israel, and it's in the colors of the Chagall window. The Chagall window, the two of them are at the Metropolitan Opera. Some of the windows are at the Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem. And I go to Israel every year. And this year, I will be there in October because I'm getting an honorary doctorate from Ben Gurion University. And I'm going to waltz in with a scholarship, an endowed scholarship in psychology for Ben Gurion University. Shalom to all of you, and next year we'll be all together at the wonderful synagogue.
They light this candle in memory of their loved ones, some of the 6 million innocent Jews that were murdered in the Shoah. They also hope that this candle shines and instills hope on all who are suffering during these devastating times.
David Knopf, second generation survivor.
Deborah Knopf Weissletter, third generation survivor.
Seth Weissletter, third generation survivor.
Jordan Weissletter, fourth generation survivor.
Dani Weissletter, fourth generation survivor.
On behalf of the fourth generation, we light this candle to remember all of those who perished in the Holocaust. And we honor those who are still with us. Door by door, we will never forget.
My name is Jessica Shaw. I'm from New York City. I'm lighting this candle for my great aunt, Ruchela Shaybowitz, and also for the childhood of my father, Henry Shaw, who should have been able to grow up in Paris, where he was born.
I'm Mike Burstyn in Los Angeles, California, and I'm lighting the candle in memory of the 1.5 million Jewish children who were murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust.
Hello, I'm Stephen Skybell, and I'm lighting a candle for Yom HaShoah in remembrance of the 6 million Jews who perished, which included members of my Skybelsky mishpacha.
My name is Michael Barron. I'm a Holocaust survivor and a veteran of World War II. Iskadal ve'iskadash mei rabba, ve'almod devroch Yerusei, ve'amlich malchusei, bechayechoin u'vyomechoin, u'bchayei dechol beis Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman koriv, ve'imru omein. Yehei shmei rabba miborach, le'olam ulolmei olmaya. Yisborach ve'yishtabach, ve'yispo'ar ve'yisrimam ve'yisnasei, Visadar, Visalei, Visalol, Shmei de Kudusha, Brich Hu. Leila Mikol Bichosa, Vishirasa, Tus Bichosa, Vinechamosa, Damiron Bi Alma, Vibru Omein. Yehei Shlom Rabba Mishmayo, Vechayim Oleinu, Vial Kol Israel, Veimru Omein. Ose Shalom Bibrimov, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al kol beis Yisrael, ve'imru Amen.
vergelten uns im Haar. Und der Nächtel wird verschwinden mit den Beinen. Na, die Sonne in dem Kajor. Wie Apollon so geht das Lied von dort zu dort. Na, Fasane mit die Sonne in dem Kajor. Wie Apollon das Lied von dort zu dort. Das wird geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von einer Feugeläufle frei. Das hat der Volk zu wischen und dicke Welt. Das wird gesungen mit einer Gannes in die Hand. Das hat der Volk zu wischen und dicke Welt. Das wird gesungen mit einer Gannes in der Hand. Sag nicht immer, dass du gehst dem besten Weg. Dann sind wir dich.
This marks the end of our commemoration. On behalf of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.